Okay, so we are now arrived at the end of this very long conference, intense, rich, with a lot of ideas, stimuli, reflection, dialogue, bounds, etc. So now it's time to try to wrap up, to summarize a little bit, and to take some, to raise some take-home messages that could be important for all of us. In this conference, we address some of the key themes that are part of the umbrella term of global education and learning, and it is important to just to summarize and to identify, to point out some of the key messages related to human rights, sustainability, peace, etc. So everything that is related to the theme of this conference, and we want to do this from different perspectives, because another characteristic of this conference is that we are trying to collect different voices, different perspectives, different actors who play a major role in promoting global citizenship education, global education and learning, policy and practice, from the civil society organization perspective, to the policymakers, to the practitioners, and of course, the academics. In this table, we have representatives of different voices that belong to this large community of angels. Therefore, we wanted to have some of these messages taken from them. But before giving the floor to my guest, let me summarize some of the important data from this conference, because it was a very rich. When I say was a very rich and diverse conference, I have evidence for that. It's not just an opinion. I have evidence. We have now 290 participants, 2,090 participants plus 120 online. So this is definitely the largest angel conference we have ever had in our short but intense history. So big applause for that. And when I say diverse, I also have evidence, because participants were from 65 different countries were represented in this conference. 65 different countries. We had the opportunity and the privilege to listen to 91 presentations, which is a small part, because we received originally almost 220 presentations, but we had to have a very strong selection, unfortunately, but the space is as such. Then we have also 6 symposia and 6 workshops in addition to the presentation. So it's a very great, very big results, which I would say demonstrate empirically the growth of our community. And I think that is now the moment to give a great applause to all of you who represent this conference. You contributed to the success. Okay, so let's proceed in this way for your very short highlights, because just 5-6 minutes for your summarizing. So, Evarist Bartolo, former Minister of Malta.
First of all, I'd like to pay tribute to Minister Momodou. I don't think I would hear a European Foreign Affairs Minister talking like that. Because to be wise and realistic today, you have to talk about war and about the need to rearm, and not to spend money on education or on health or on social services, but to produce military tanks, missiles, and jet fighters. That is the way to be a modern foreign affairs minister in Europe. I remember being attacked as being naive as well when I talked about peace and dialogue and negotiation. But we must not let ourselves be bullied by such short-sighted people. We've spoken about peace. I think because we live in a global war zone where everything is being weaponized, and where, yes, military war is restricted to some territories, but the global war is going on everywhere and touching everyone. Everything is being weaponized. Human rights, democracy, religion, even the parable of the Good Samaritan. Because today's version of the Good Samaritan is that you do not help your enemies. You help the ones who think like you and who are like you. It's enough to see what's happening in Gaza. I mean, to have the cheek to call an organization humanitarian and then restrict to whom you help and not help is terrible. Because of the times we're living in, I think in education we must talk about enemies and reflect about enemies. We do not do it. It's as if it's a word which we shouldn't use. It's not good for education to talk about enemies. But I think we need to talk about enemies more than ever. Who is an enemy? Why do we need enemies? How do we construct enemies? How we make enemies? Is it just a matter of perception? Do we make enemies in reality? And how do we disarm the idea of enemies? Remember that 8 years ago we had the great American writer Archibald MacLeish writing the preamble to UNESCO about constructing peace. We are constructing enemies. We are constructing enemies in our heads. It's important to say that we have domestic enemies. Those who disagree with us are enemies. And we find it very convenient to create labels, to dehumanize. Obviously, our enemies are irrational. Our enemies are, cruel. Our enemies are danger. But then also, it's very important to create external enemies. Even though, those of you who are familiar with the famous poem of Wilfred Owen, I am the enemy you killed, my friend. It's very easy to flip from being an enemy to a friend and vice versa. So I think it is very important now, at a time when not only are we constructing enemies everywhere, we are enemies as well. Because if we do not think with the group, we are traitors. We are sleeping with the enemy. In our part of the world, we say we are Putin's puppets. If you simply say, are you sure that we should be doing what we're doing? Even that is very, very dangerous. Archibald MacLeish, who wrote that preamble, passed through the same experience with McCarthyism in the 50s. Because he said, shouldn't we think about others, try to understand them? Why are they different to us? The fact that they are different, does it make them an enemy? He was called a communist, he was called anti-American, he was persecuted quite a lot. The last point I want to make is that we must not let ourselves be carried away by this current. Only dead fish flow with the current, and we cannot afford to be dead fish in education, so we have to swim against the current. We have to help ourselves and our students be, I think Libby mentioned it today, earlier on, misfits. Yes, we need misfits. We need creative misfits. We need people who are ready to say, no, I do not agree. If we all think the same, as Benjamin Franklin said, then most of us are not doing any thinking at all. So we should have the courage to think differently, to disagree. We definitely cannot have education for a comfort zone or for certainty. We should, together with our students, prepare them for a culture of courage and to be traitors. To be traitors to oppressors, yes, why shouldn't we betray oppressors? Why shouldn't we betray warmongers? We shouldn't be afraid. We should not let them define us who is loyal and who is treacherous in this situation. And in this moment of so much division and polarization, definitely despair is a luxury we cannot afford, definitely. We should be able to make ourselves cross cultures, build bridges. Yes, we need narratives of hurt. Please, peace is not sedation. Peace cannot be a painkiller. So when we're talking about things that have hurt, we should call them by their name. But we shouldn't stop there. So as much as we need education to educate us about the hurts that we've had, and especially in this part of the world, we've caused a lot of hurt and pain to others because we thought God was on our side, apart from military superior strength. But we should have education to heal. There is a time also for healing. And there is a possibility, and I agree completely with what even the minister was saying. Yes, and I agree with you, Massimiliano, when you said we've spoken a lot and we need to listen. We need to educate our students to listen. We don't listen enough. But at the same time, I think we can work together to heal the wounds that have happened over the last centuries. And we can heal these wounds together. Wounds cannot be healed only by the global South. Definitely not by the global North, who still has not acknowledged them enough. We need to heal these wounds together. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, Areej Alsayed. She's a human rights activist. She's member of the BMZ Youth Council, youpaN?
And youpaN.
And youpaN. Okay, please.
Yeah, hi. First of all, today is Eid al-Adha. It's like one of the two most important Muslim festivals. So it's like I really want to thank all the Muslims to be here today and also wish them Eid Mubarak. And yeah, my name is Areej, and it's like really a true honor to be here and speak, not like only as a young person, but also as someone whose life has been directly shaped by the very question that we discussed in this conference. Over the past 2 days, One Truth has issued again and again. Global education is not just a field of research. It is a force for transformation, but transformation doesn't happen by default. It happens when we intentionally bring the margins to the center. When those historically excluded are recognized not as people just around us, but also as co-authors of the future that we imagine and that we want to build together. For me, this is deeply personal. I was born in Syria and displaced by war. For years, I was denied education, not by choice, but by conflict and injustice. When I finally returned to school in a new country, I wasn't just learning a new language or new curriculum. I was learning how to exist in spaces that didn't see me. I kept asking, why is my story missing? Why do we learn about the world, but not about justice and about the different stories and perspectives? That's why global education matters. Because of young people like me, concepts like democracy, human rights, peace, sustainability, and also justice are not just distant ideals. They are lifelines. They are not optionals or optional topics, but they are essential tools for survival, dignity, and also agency. We often hear the question, why must youth be at the center? Today, there are over 1 billion young people worldwide, the largest generation in history. Yet we remain largely excluded from decision-making. Globally, less than 2.6% of the parliamentarians are under 30. Education policy is still too often designed about young people, but without young people, without us. If global education is to prepare learners for today's complex world, Young people must be engaged as co-creators, not as guests, not as tokens, but as partners with power and influence. Researchers that shared at this conference confirmed what youth already know. Education systems are most effective when they are participatory and grounded in lived realities. We must embed meaningful youth participation in all stages of education policy, from design to implementation, but also to evaluation. In Germany, I served on Youth Advisory Council and see firsthand how youth voices can influence national strategies, but when they are taken seriously. But inclusion must go beyond symbolism. It must mean representation and respect, especially for those still excluded. Marginalized youth, indigenous youth, youth with disabilities. Being invited to the table is not enough. Our voices must count and being heard. Much of what we learned as young people about climate justice, peace, and solidarity happens outside formal classrooms, in youth-led spaces, intercultural exchanges, activist networks, and advocacy forums. These forms of learning are powerful. Policies must recognize and fund non-formal education not as extras, but as vital part of education systems. We also need to invest in educators and scholars as facilitator of critical dialogue. Teachers and scholars are not just transmitters of facts, but they catalyze for transformation. Yet many lack the tools or support to engage with topics like inequality and or global responsibility. That's why investment in peace and human rights education and in teacher trainings is essential. Learning doesn't end at the classroom door. It happens across communities, generations, and platforms. Today, more than 242 million children and youth are affected by conflicts, genocide, disaster, and displacement. Education must be treated as fundamental right, not as luxury during crisis. This means protection schools, prioritizing education in emergency budgets, and building inclusive system for displaced learners. We cannot speak for peace or justice if millions are still denying the basic right to learn. Throughout this conference, we have seen how global education research can open pathways for change. But research must be done with communities, not just about them. This is not about researchers generating data and policymakers implementing it. It's about co-creating knowledge, grounded in lived experiences and especially youth experiences. We have seen encouraging momentum around frameworks like the Dublin Declaration and the UNESCO recommendation on education for peace, human rights, and sustainable development. But those commitments must move from paper to practice and be felt in classrooms, teacher trainings, and refugee camps. In a world facing overlapping crises, climate, conflict, displacement, and equality, global education offers not just hope, but tools for resilience, resistance, and renewal. But only if it's rooted in justice, and if it includes who have been excluded, and only if we act now. Let this conference not just end with reflection, but with commitment. A commitment to act on research, to co-create with young people, and to make a global education the foundation of the world we want to build. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for this for your comments and your take-home messages. And now, one of the voices for the university, from the academia, Professor Felisa Tibbitts from the University of Utrecht and Columbia University Teacher College, but also UNESCO Chair in Human Rights in Higher Education, right? Okay, please.
Thank you. That's a long title. But I actually consider myself in higher education and a civil society person. I only migrated into higher education 10 years ago. And like you, I consider myself primarily a human rights activist. And so my takeaway from this conference, which has been absolutely wonderful, is the core focus on justice. And I think that justice remains central to our work. Clearly in the field of human rights education and learning, it's always there, but I felt also across all the presentations really here that justice was also of central interest and a really kind of a moral compass for all of our work. And we need to continue to pursue this in our theoretical frameworks and our policy guidelines and in our empirical research. The justice norms are diverse, of course. They include human rights, but they're not exclusively human rights. Human rights themselves are broad and evolving. There are other frames of justice, like social justice, and so forth. And some of the terms that we've heard a lot also, non-discrimination, equality, inclusion, decoloniality. So, of course, these are sort of wide terms, but I think that part of what we do in our research is try to understand them, co-define them maybe, and co-create knowledge so that they can be acted on, because justice norms aren't just philosophical. If they're left as a philosophical exercise, I think in terms of our work, they haven't done their job. The right to quality education is also something that's come up. I think our joint understanding is that SDG 4.7, including global learning, is part of quality education. So it is the right to education, the right to receive a quality education, and that quality education includes global learning. It includes all the frames that we've been discussing in the last 2 days. Because all these frames, human rights education, peace education, global learning, education for sustainable development, are with this sort of vision, this idealistic vision of a just, sustainable, and peaceful planet. And this interrelatedness from a technical point of view in education is sometimes confusing. How do we separate out what's peace education from human rights education or ESD? But I'm really not that concerned about the ways in which they're interrelated personally. I think that we can, of course, spend some time thinking about what's the same and different, but ultimately, what matters to me anyway is what happens in the field, in the schooling systems, in civil society organizations, where you take this wide frame and figure out what is it that we need to be doing, especially around meeting justice goals. So I've enjoyed very much in this conference, and I want to thank all the people whose work I had the privilege of hearing. I want to thank everyone who's pushing boundaries, because I felt a lot of times that people were pushing boundaries in their own theoretical frameworks and how they were doing their research, calling for inclusion in ways I hadn't even thought about. And so I love the ways that we're pushing boundaries, and I hope that we keep that. I was asked, I think we're all asked, but I took it that I also should address the issue of policy. So what does all this mean for policy? And I think there are those among us who are policymakers, who were policymakers, who understand, and we understand as researchers, that we need to be presenting our evidence in a way that is meaningful, that it's relevant, it's understandable, it's operational. I don't think I've summarized that. I'm not going to go into more detail than that. But separate from that, on the theme of justice, what I'd like to, assert for all of us is that we should think of ourselves not only as, of course, having relationships and trying to influence policy, but to also be a kind of critical friend to policymakers. Because ministries, change with political winds, and in the end, our work is the work that gets sustained. And so we need to think of ourselves in a kind of continuum, an evolving one, a critical one, an exciting and dynamic one, but one that is still centered, again, on justice. And I think that we need to be, reminding ourselves of this and accepting that we are going to be critical friends in that way. And sometimes we're going to be more welcomed by ministries than other times. But we can hold these places in higher education. We can hold these places in civil society, and that's fine. So even though we're focusing on schools, there are these other places where we have maybe more latitude at times to continue this work on the focus on justice. And I'd like to conclude by, I've had some conversations in the hallways with a number of people, which has been really wonderful. And a lot of us have said the same thing, which is like, wow, it's really great to be together. And we feel such solidarity, and that especially in these very difficult times, how essential it is, really, to feel like we're part of a community or even a family, I would say, with core values and committed to global learning and these associated approaches. So I really want to say that I take away also this feeling of solidarity. I also want to recognize, and I said it a bit earlier in a panel I was in, that I think that the struggle that we are feeling now, politically and in other ways, is actually, it can be generative for us. And maybe that is a bit optimistic, but I think that a lot of what we've seen as breakthroughs certainly in the human rights world, that is all from struggle. I mean, we didn't get human rights handed to us. That was all from social movement, people's struggles. And so insofar as, I mean, not all of us self-identify as activists, but insofar as we do identify with justice goals, that struggle is okay, that will potentially lead us into new breakthroughs and ways of thinking. We have lots of critiques of, for example, neoliberalism and higher education. And, we're having a lot of stresses now in higher ed. Maybe that places us in a new position for thinking in new and creative ways about learning for adults. And finally, I do want to end on the note of hope. And I know that we all have our own experiences of this, but of course, the pedagogy of hope, which was mentioned at the very, very beginning, I think, of our conference, at least yesterday's part of the conference, Paulo Freire's pedagogy of hope was mentioned. And I know that we quote him a lot, but there's a reason why. So I want to just end with just a few quotes from Freire. Hope as an ethical imperative. Hope is not naive optimism, but a radical act grounded in the belief that change is possible. Freire argues that educators and learners, that's all of us, must be sustained by hope, even in contexts of oppression, inequality, or violence. And finally, and this is important, hope motivates action towards justice rather than resignation to the status quo. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, very inspiring. Okay, again, on my left, Libby Giles. She's director of the New Zealand Centre for Global Studies in New Zealand.
Kia ora, Max. Thank you very much. Kia ora tātou. Well, as we close this rich and hopeful conference, I was going to put in the same quote, but I'll leave that now. I just have a few reflections on what I think we are being called to do as researchers, educators, policy actors, activists, everyone involved in this moment. We collectively here, we're building a stronger policy research alliances with global and Indigenous perspectives. So it's been identified that research must be connected globally, collaborative, empirically grounded, reflective of language and worldview diversity, and open to Indigenous frameworks. We've had numerous reminders of the challenges that we face, from climate disruption to democratic backsliding, deepening inequality, and that can feel really overwhelming. But as Sasha said early on, people are experiencing a kind of feeling of helplessness. But we are here to resist that helplessness. Education and research that informs policy is one of our most powerful tools to foster agency, participation, and hope. So, Ingrid, I really hope you're not right about the education thing, but we're going to keep plugging forward anyway, because I think it's going to work eventually. Nanaya brought this home really powerfully earlier on, reminding us that Indigenous knowledge systems offer not just a means to redress past injustices, but as a blueprint for creating more inclusive, resilient, and ethical governance, not to be appropriated by academia, but engaged with in genuine partnership. These are not abstract ideas. They speak directly to the current crises that we face and the erosion of democratic trust. Global citizenship education can't just be technocratic. And I'm going to cite Veronica here too, talking about you can't be a global citizen without emotion, without care, without love. Education must invite young people to see through the eyes of others, as we saw in the wonderful story of the girl in the video. We need to invite children to fall in love with the world. And to take action. Leah reminded us starkly that policy is too often now made without evidence and without regard for the truth, undermining democracy. We need research, policy, and practice alliances that not only defend truth, but build new ways of thinking and acting. Annette encouraged us to connect research across silos, across borders, and I would add across worldviews. Doug stressed the need for practitioners and researchers to learn together. We need to identify the priorities for research. It's been brought to our attention in a case in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I would love to see us engage in research as solutions to other research. So we have a new report on social cohesion in New Zealand that has exposed a deeply fractured society that is well on the way to full-on polarisation. I would love to see some research into the ability of global education and learning to be a solution to that. We've had so many wonderful insights, and a humanist brought to it too. And I think, Felisa, in your talk about rights, we've now extending these ideas of rights beyond human rights into what we now know. We've got examples of the rights of the environment, and we've got the personhood of rivers, Whanganui in New Zealand, and a river in Colombia as well. Ingrid's insights on language gave us another vital lesson. Multilingualism is a strength, not a deficit. In our own country, Aotearoa, we see how revitalising te reo Māori has been central to renewing cultural identity and deepening our sense of citizenship. However, these gains are fragile, and we see some backsliding there, so we must stay vigilant. Language is at the heart of global citizenship. It shapes who is included and whose knowledge counts. And I really love it when you find a word in another language that captures so much that it would take maybe 2 or 3 sentences to say in your own. Bildung is that word in German. That's the one for us for this conference, I think. So, we've heard that all of this work is hard. We know that, and we know that it's possible. I do remember having a conversation with a former Prime Minister of New Zealand. It was Sir Geoffrey Palmer, who knows a lot about a lot of things, as I will know. And he said to me, oh, this stuff you're doing with global citizenship is really good, but you do know it's going to take 30 years. And he's right, it is going to. Our conference began in hope, so we must close it by renewing that hope. And with a deepened sense of responsibility. Not that I'm going to get us into a stoush with Momodou about the use of the word responsibility here. Change doesn't happen in easy times. It happens in tough times. So that's what we're about too. So again, some of Liam's words. The mining of people's hearts and minds for political gain is not a pretty picture. We can't give in to despair. We are educated. We will move forward. There's a tendency to shy away from frightening young people about the realities of global challenges. And I often refer to a contemporary of mine who tells a story when she's asked about this. She says that when she was 12, she asked her father if we were all going to die from nuclear war. And he said, you know what, there's a lot of really good people working really hard to solve these problems. She's one of them. And so are all of we, because of that. We don't shy away from it. We don't say, oh, it's all right, darling, everything's going to be fine. We know that it's not going to be just fine by brushing it under the carpet, but we can empower people. So I think I'm just going to kind of cut a bit short here because I think everybody has said most things, but I'd just like to say, in 2023, I facilitated a global citizenship education forum called Step Up to the World to Mai Ki Te Ao. This is a continuing name of our education initiatives, inviting learners to embrace opportunity with confidence, courage, and responsibility. Anyway, I sent a letter to the Minister of Foreign Affairs to invite her to open our forum. And it was quite a palaver getting there, I have to say. It was quite a lot of to and fro before I got the answer that I wanted. And I have to say, it turned out to be one of my better moves. So thank you, Nanaya, and thank you for joining our family of misfits in this work now. It means so much. And so I think just collectively, I want to invite us all to step up to the world to mai ki te ao. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou.
Thank you very much, Libby. Thank you. And now another perspective from a policymakers, Dr. Momodou Sallah, from the Ministry of Finance and Economic on the Gambia.
Thank you, Professor Torosi. Thank you, panelists. Good afternoon, people. What is wrong with you? Come on, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Momodou.
I know you're tired, and I know it's been a long time, but let's inject some humor into this as well. Just to say that before the Minister of Finance in the Gambia sacks me, I'm not speaking on their behalf. I actually am Professor Emeritus at Montfort University, where I taught for 20 years in the UK in Leicester, until last May when I thought that I'll go and do something else. I'm tired of teaching. So that's my story. But I straddle the policymaking, the academia, and also the activism. So I see myself as a decolonial scholar activist, and I wear many hats at the same time. I just want to start by recognizing the invitation. I was one of the global critical friends, like my dear friend here, and a number of us. I think about 40 people were invited from across the world, and about 24 people were actively engaged in that. And I really appreciated being involved in that process of being a global critical friend that was able to critique the development of the Dublin Declaration. And in there, we could see epistemic justice, we could see the principle of mutuality in action, and we could also see, Sallah likes to invite me sometimes to cause trouble, but we could see that there was an injection of decoloniality in the process. And we were very, very critical in that process. Like my favorite hobby horse is like the bit about historical legacies. And we were not explicit enough in the declaration about what historical legacies mean. It could mean so many other things. But we were talking about, let's call it out for what it is. Let's talk about decoloniality. Let's talk about inequalities. Let's talk about kind of like epistemic, systemic violence. Let's talk about all of these things openly. So, and I think our injection of that in the Dublin Declaration was really, really helpful. It gave me a lot of hope. Because if you look at the whole notion of coloniality, and Kijano talks about the coloniality of power, where systems were designed, without us in mind. And if we look at also the fact that the Dublin Declaration, for example, is one of the most widely referenced documents in global education worldwide. But we also look at the fact that there's a very Eurocentric kind of like dimension to some of our work. But we can also understand that globalization, means that time and space and distance have been conquered in ways that have never been seen before. So the symbiotic relationship of the world, different parts of the world, the inextricability of our existence, whether it's from America or from Africa or from Europe, it's so powerful that whatever we do here reverberates there. So we cannot do a document that is exclusively for Europe, because Europe doesn't live in an island. That symbiotic relationship with other parts of the world, it's really, really important. And if we talk about decoloniality, because I see decoloniality every day, I see it in terms of justice, I see it in terms of education, I see it in terms of administration, I see it in terms of governance and what it means, and even how people look. So the coloniality is embedded. It's not an old relic whose hangovers we are suffering from. The coloniality is a living, breathing entity that impacts in ways that some of us might not even understand. So for me, that coloniality of power is really, really important. And I think as a researcher, as a policymaker, as an activist, I see this replicated, where the oppression is still being reproduced in ways that are very, very complicated, that are very, very subtle, but are also very, very damaging. And what I want to take away from here is, okay, as people who are the hem of the production, the sanctification, the validation, the configuration of ways of knowing and ways of being, to what extent are we actually being reflective in this kind of process, being mutual in the production of knowledge, in the dissemination of knowledge? And for me, as researchers and as policymakers who hold a lot of power, not only from a Eurocentric perspective, but a global majority perspective, how do we embed that, given the power that our books are core textbooks, our articles are cited 1 million times? So, and what is the impact we do when we do all of these things? So for me, that is really, really important. And that's why in my work, I talk a lot about the pedagogy of disruption. And that's about intentional disruption of the status quo. In Freire's parlance, the defective logic of the system. How do we dislodge that? How do we dislodge the defective logic of the system? And in doing that, what are the pedagogic approaches that we have? In doing that, I mean, how do we embed a pedagogy of compassion, that is kind to ourselves and kind with the people that we deal with? How do we engage in a pedagogy of discomfort, where we're able to deal with all of these horrible, nasty feelings, but also all of these oppressive kind of like structural violence issues that exist now. So how do we deal with that in a compassionate way? Pedagogy of ambiguity, because of where we're coming from and how we construct meaning and how we establish context and all of these things. So how do we name all of these things in terms of disruption? So for me, it's also important as we move forward, how that informs us and informs what we do. And the last bit is like, for me, global education is about how we provoke consciousness and how we support action or take action. But in doing that, how can we have courageous convictions? There are certain topics that we're scared to speak about. And does our practice and our theory extend to the extent only we feel comfortable? Or are we able to really kind of like do what needs to be done? Is global education an accessory that we feel quite happy about, and it eases our conscience rather than unraveling the structural damages that exist, that we are confronted with on a daily basis? Is it safer to hide behind all of those things in terms of the impact, the indexing, and the Google citation? So where is that? I challenge you. Where is that courageous conviction that we are known for? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Professor Sallah, for this perspective, multiple perspective. Okay, let's go to the end, to this closing panel, and I'm very happy to give the floor to those who opened this conference. So, as you remember, the conference has been opened by the Early Career Researcher Conference, and then the representative of the Early Career Researchers group of the Angel Network will conclude. So, I think first is Cheng Hui. Cheng Hui first. Wherever you want.
Hi, everyone. I'm Zheng Hui, a PhD researcher from the University of Glasgow in the UK, and I'm originally from Taiwan. Angel is actually the very first conference I have attended since starting my PhD, and I'm happy that Angel is the one. Over the past 3 days, I have heard and learned from so many excellent presentations about democracy, global social justice, sustainability, human rights with strong critical thinking and reflection. It's been really inspiring and very helpful for sure. I personally am a non-indigenous researcher, but I am also an indigenous epistemology lifelong learner and advocate. I would like to share a reflection Bunun knowledge holder in Taiwan brought to me. As I keep asking them about their educational ideas and approaches, they stop me and explain. For them, education, this word, is not exist. What they are doing simply is only Min Bunun, which stands for learning to be a human. I also hear similar ideas from the case from Aotearoa, Vietnam, Finland, Canada, Australia, Colombia, and also Nigeria in the past 3 days. And I want to say thank you, Angel, to provide the chance for amplifying different voices and demonstrate a new possibility about global education. As an early career researcher, it's really amazing to meet so many activists, policymakers, and scholars whose work I've read before, like Veronica, Massimiliano, and Bennett. They are always listening, patient, and smiling. It's really vital for me and I think for ECR as well. And you guys are just like Katy Perry for me. I also want to appreciate my wonderful ECR team. Many of the meaningful and insightful conversations I've had were with them. And in the last, thank you again, Angel. I can't wait to work with you all together and try to make the world slightly better. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chen Kiwi. And Yuemiao?
Hi, everyone. My name is Yue Miao. I am also a PhD student. I'm from University of Edinburgh. Chonghui and I just talked about that. We're both from institutions in Scotland, but we don't seem to represent Scotland voice here. But so maybe in the future Angel Conference, there will be more voices from Scotland, or maybe we can be representatives of Scotland. So I wanted to share just 2 personal takeaways from this conference and then promote again our ECR network of Angel. So my first takeaway would be about the emotional aspect of global citizenship education. So in my presentation, during the ECR day, I shared one quote from one of my participants, which made me emotional during our interview. And then at yesterday's keynote from Veronica, she mentioned again the emotional aspect of GCE, which made me reflect again of this aspect, that GCE is not just cognitive, not intellectual, but we need to take the emotional aspect of it really seriously, because emotion is also knowledge. Our intuition is also knowledge. So that made me just wonder, but not for this PhD work because I'm nearly completing it, but maybe for the future work, I will pay more attention to the emotional aspect of it. So that's the first takeaway. And another takeaway is about reflexivity. Not reflection, but reflexivity, because I take them as different terms, because I feel like reflexivity should be more about just reflecting what happens in the past, but it's more about actions. And because I consider myself as an ethnographer, because I did an ethnographic study for my PhD. And reflexivity has been a key part in this PhD research. Because during this process, I continuously reflecting on my own positions in this world, my positions with my participants. And the reflexivity part kind of extends beyond my research, now extends to my own personal life. So for example, during this conference, these 3 days, I constantly reflecting on my positions with everyone here. So how we interact with each other and how do I feel about this interaction. And I'm sure many of us here are also thinking about this aspect during the 3 days. So I think reflexivity is really important because it helps us to conceptualize our positions in this world, not just, but also in relation to the others. So during our interactions and connections with others, we know more about who we are in this world and how should we act. I think that's a key part, also a key part of GCE, which we should tell and teach our students. And I also listened to a really interesting presentation today by, I'm sorry, I forgot the name, it's Joanne, talking about like reflections of reflective practices for a group of Irish teachers. So we know that the current forms of reflections are, well, there are many problems with it, or we can be quite critical about it. But there are so many creative forms that we can take in future reflections. So for example, we can ask our students to write a song, or to write a poem, or to make a film for part of their reflections or their practices of reflexivity. So there are so many ways that we can do to improve the current education system. So I'm going to move on to the final bit, which is the promotion of the ECR network. So as Massimiliano just said, we opened the conference, and now I'm here to close the conference, which I feel really honored to do this. And I feel like, well, the ECR network now is still a small network, so I'm really encouraging everyone here. If you're an ECR early career researcher, please do join our network. If you're not ECR, tell your students to join the ECR network. Because Massimiliano just said that in this conference we heard voices from 63 countries. But about 63, 60, more than 60. But we know that there are many more countries in the world, right? How many countries are there? Yeah, 190, 193, 94.
Like the UN state.
And also we know there are many places in the world, or there are many people in the world who don't belong to a country or a state currently. So we may not have heard of their voices in this conference, which makes me feel like, well, indeed, we are making a really great progress here. We heard a lot of people's voices, but there are so many other voices we haven't heard. So that's the point of expanding this network, the Angel network, the ECR network. So tell your friends, tell our students, join our network. And I wasn't here yesterday at the Angel meeting, but I heard there was a particular discussion about what we can do in this ECR network. So for example, in the future, we might have opportunities to, we will co-create this network. We can do whatever we want in this network, and we can do workshops, we can do conferences for ECR only, and also we can maybe have more opportunities to visit other places in the world, other universities outside Europe. I tend not to use the word global north or global south because I tend not to use these binary labels. But just outside Europe, we may have opportunities to go to other places, but this need help from Angel board. So I think I'll stop there because I feel like I'm talking too much. So thanks everyone for this wonderful and brilliant conference, and I really enjoyed listening to everyone's voices. And I hope that in the future we can bring more voices from more places in the world to the Angel conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you.